Okay. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We have a quorum. So call our meeting to order for 12th of January, Finance Committee. Thank you, Terry. We are being recorded and maybe streamed. I think this room has streaming capability, so
You are being streamed.
so just be mindful of that. Any public comment this afternoon? Ms. Stover?
Yes, I have two things, and if it's the Rotary, I could give a happy reason and
Would you please come up and speak so that, I'm sorry to make everybody do this, but it's really, and I know the public can't hear if they're watching it unless you get right up here.
The first thing I'm really happy about is that the selectmen voted to put my question number 1 on the ballot for the annual election. And that basically will let the people decide whether they want public land for a funeral home or not. And I'm happy with either vote. If people want it, I'm happy to do the work to get it done. If people don't want it, I'm happy to walk away. So one of the selectmen said that he thought it would be interesting if we had a substantial vote for yes on the ballot, that perhaps the town and the planning department could find a site that would be different than the 3 articles that I had put on warrant. If the Board of Selectmen and the Finance Committee agreed to put that in their recommendations, I wouldn't have to call the articles at all for discussion. I'm happy to find any other place. People don't care where it is, I don't think.
So just replay that for me. So
If,
it's going to go on the ballot,
yes,
which will occur 2 weeks after town meeting.
correct.
Okay.
And if in the recommendations by the Selectmen and the Finance Committee, you said.
On the 3 land articles.
Yes.
Okay.
You said, dependent on the vote at the ballot, if there's a substantial vote for yes, then we, the town, would offer to find another site that would be approved, that would be acceptable to the town to choose other than the 3 sites I picked, in which case I would not call them for discussion.
So, just to, sort of as a point of clarification anyway, for my own edification, if we were to say something along the lines of the applicant has agreed that they would look at another site pending the outcome,
Yes.
would that satisfy us a comment? I'm concerned about
Yes.
us. I think your earlier suggested language was probably going to walk us into something that.
Okay, town council, I'm happy with whatever town council
Okay.
comes up with, but I think that would be a positive solution for all concerned. And again, I don't want to force anybody into anything. I'm happy to do what the people want, but if people
Okay.
don't want it, I'm happy to walk away.
Okay, great.
I have a question, David. Catherine, was it discussed last night, with those 3 potential parcels, did anyone make any reference to the fact that did not like those 3 parcels?
I believe there was. I was not in attendance. I had
Okay.
family obligations, but from talking to Erica, she thought they had said that they weren't sure what they were going to do with the Island Home because that's been taken off the ballot. They're going to vet the current site for that. The fire station, they had no plans specific for what to do with that property. And Tacoma Way, they really wanted to reserve just in case they needed additional housing or land for housing in that area. The lands, the site that I had picked, according to Andrew, was not earmarked for anything, housing or anything else. So that's why I picked those lots.
Okay.
But I'm happy to take anything else where the town wants to put it. It just needs to have sewer and water.
Thank you.
Okay. I didn't print out the back half of my agenda. Can we even have a discussion about this beyond?
She's making copies right now, too.
Okay, we could take this a little bit out of order if we wanted to have a discussion about it. as a solution?
Sure.
Well, I'm thinking maybe talk to the selectmen first.
Well, I mean, we're
Get a
going to make,
consensus.
I mean, we would just make a comment that we
I
would
see.
urge the town to find a piece of property that's suitable to the applicant. We wouldn't, we're not in a position to tell them to, the town to
I
do
see.
that. That would be our recommendation
I see.
and comment. And I mean, I think that that's what I was trying to get at. I think that satisfies your request,
Yes.
so. How do people feel about approaching those three parcels? So what we would do is either take a vote to take no action or not to adopt with the comment that if the ballot question, I'm assuming that 50% is the, triggering number here, that the town would work to find a suitable site for them to stand up a business. Is that?
Yeah, I'm amenable to that. I think that saves us from any of the potential pitfalls about the properties being held back, multiple properties being held for that purpose. And I don't think it delays at all the project, so,
No.
yeah. It's the right way to go.
So preference on not to adopt or take no action?
I'd say take no action.
No action.
Okay. You want to make that an emotion?
Sure. I'll make the motion, to take no action, and then we can discuss the comment separately.
And then we'll write a comment that fits along the lines of what we just
Thank
spoke
you.
about. Okay. Any further discussion?
Not on that.
No,
have my
I mean,
second.
for my-
Oh, I'm sorry.
No? All in favor? Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Kathy.
Well, I have my second thing now,
Oh,
my second public comment.
are you on, might it be on the agenda because we have a busy agenda and I know Brian's
Well, I
got
think
to-
I'm just making a comment about something I see that's on the agenda that I've been asking for since 1999, and I think it's fabulous that you're doing it, which is to propose that we have an accurate count of the
Oh,
people
okay.
here. I'm really
Well-
happy about that.
Hang around and you'll hear our discussion about it. Great, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We had minutes in our package. Did people have sufficient amount of time to look at them? No. Okay, so given that you haven't had time, let's just hold them over until our next meeting.
Till the
We'll deal with them.
19th?
Yes.
We'll add them to the 19th, okay.
Committee reports, anything, we talked about it the other day, you were at the selectmen's meeting last night? Yes. Your job's done. No, I guess your job isn't. You just signed up for another 2 years,
At least.
at least.
Did I sign up?
What does that mean?
The selectmen voted to take our island home off of the warrant for this year, pending a fair amount of additional work, so, which for us immediately means that we're not going to have it next week, so we're not going to have to go through that process. I'm sort of joking with Cliff, because I think they're signed up for
For
a
a long
lot more.
time, but 2 years wasn't really discussed, right? I mean, we didn't. delay it.
Facetious.
Okay, good. All right. Just wanna make
Oh, I'd take the over-under on that. Okay. Brian, I'd like you to lead our discussion on the
Sure.
appropriation articles. Just for everybody to know, Brian needs to leave by 5:30, so we'll get through that, and then we have a number of other items, but this will lead us through the discussion. And for, well, Gene, and Henry, you haven't gone through this either, have you? So this will be helpful. It's not that complicated, but it's
Right.
sometimes hard to follow.
So the first one on the agenda, Mr. Chairman, is the Waterways Improvements
Would
Fund.
you
Yep.
pull that forward? Thank you.
I don't know if it goes much further than that, but let's.
Somebody told it already.
Perhaps before you start, Brian, just a quick overview of what we try to do with these improvement funds and why they exist and
So the Waterways Improvement Fund is actually authorized under Chapter 60B and Chapter 91 of Mass General Laws. And it generally is used for the maintenance, dredging, cleaning, and improvements of the harbors, inland waters, and great ponds, and the public access. Or it can be used for the breakwaters, piers, wharves, moorings, and it can also be used for law enforcement and fire prevention as well. So we typically, there's been some salary charge to it. I actually was talking to the deputy police chief today. We're not exactly sure why, because we don't believe that we should be charging any salary to there. So 17 budget for salary actually will not be charged there. This, once it's appropriated, it could be used for any lawful purpose within the fund. So we actually will just move that down to either repair, maintenance of equipment, and professional services. We'll also be doing that in all the other years, 18, 19, 20, and 21. The majority of this money annually is spent or is reserved and anticipated to be spent basically for the repair of the town pier and maintenance of the town pier. We could use it for water quality testing or in dredging. This year, we do have $150,000 of the $362,000 that was authorized at town meeting that's being used to come up with a dredge plan for the various areas that need to be dredged so that we can get on a regular cycle to do that. The main funding source for this is the mooring permits. We also get we have a private contract with a mooring company for the mooring field, and they also, we receive about $75,000, just over $75,000 annually. It's a 5-year contract, estimated at 2.5%, and then boat excise tax. Typically, we only budget for boat excise tax for the most recent or the upcoming fiscal year. We don't budget all of the prior years because, unlike motor vehicle excise tax, if you don't pay your boat excise tax, we have no statutory power to enforce collection of it based on the way the law is written. So any of the small amounts that we get in the prior years, we're certainly grateful for, but if somebody doesn't pay it, we can't go after them for it. So
It's good to know.
It is.
Well, please don't anybody ask for this. So in fiscal 18, as I said, we would move the salary and the overtime actually would still be part of the fund, but they would be allocated between equipment or professional services or any additional equipment that needs to be purchased. So the total that we would be recommending at the town meeting when we get to it, or when you get to your motions, would be $184,200. And I have discussed this with the deputy police chief this morning again, and he's in agreement and concurrence, because what happens with this fund is once town meeting authorizes it, unless we ask town meeting to defund the prior authorization, then the money is reserved and carries forward until it's all expended. So, like I said, a lot of the money is always anticipated to be used in the event we need repairs to the town pier or things of that nature. We can do water quality testing out of here as well, and if we had small dredging projects that wouldn't cost a lot, based on the cost of dredging, I don't think I know of a small project. We could do something like that. So we have kind of the Waterways Improvement Fund. Is there any questions on it?
In the past 6, 7 years, we've had a lot of storms and damage. Have we ever received any money from the state?
Yes, so for Winter Storm Juno, we actually received, which was the most recent one, we had $1.2 million of damage done to the pier, and we received from FEMA just under $900,000 for it.
Oh, good.
And we were lucky because it was also a wind and water event. The other thing that everybody should know is that I hope that we don't have any need for it, but we have actually been able to procure insurance on the pier, which is the first time in a long time that we've ever been able to do that. It's under an excess flood policy, but it does cover the pier.
What's the premium?
It was enough.
Ah,
But since we put everything out to bid, it still came within what we had for allocable dollars, so it made sense to add it.
Does something like Easy Street bulkhead repair and bolstering?
We could use that for that piece too. The major repair that was just done was done through a state grant and a low interest loan, but if there were minor repairs to it, we could use this to do that. Yes.
Okay.
So the next one on the.
Peter, go ahead.
I'm sorry, Brett, just one question. You show a decrease in your mooring revenue.
Yeah, it's kind of fluctuated, so,
Less boats?
I think part of it was there was some prepayments of the mooring permits when it was opened up last year, so we're anticipating that we'll get slightly less than that. based on that factor when I redid the law.
So all that money, if it was prepaid, would be recognized when it was paid?
Well, it would be recognized because we're on the cash basis for revenue, it would be recognized, and it would sit in retained earnings.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. Next on the agenda is the airport revolving, or fuel revolver, and of course, we do have not only the airport manager, Tom Rafter here, but the finance manager for the airport, Jamie Sansberg. So if there's anything I can't answer, either one of the two of them can help me out. 2017, we authorized $4 million.
Could you just give a little background on how this came to be for our new members?
I think I'm going to need Tom for that one, because I wasn't here when we instituted it.
Well, it happened just after I got here. I think essentially, there were some major issues with fuel fluctuation in price, and this was designed to protect us from the.
I'm sorry, Tom, would you mind coming up?
My understanding of the creation of the fuel revolver was designed to protect the airport for any fluctuations in the price of fuel. You may recall a number of years ago, prices of fuel spiked. So this allows us to maintain our margins, but allows us to keep the money there that we need if in fact there is an increase. If things proceed the way they have been, fuel stays at a lower price either way. Actually, when we maintain the margins, we're going to use this fund to offset some other costs and things at the airport, because this is our major source of funding.
Revenue. Thank you.
I mean, stay here.
Yeah, stay.
Okay. So at 2017 town meeting, the town authorized a cap on the fuel revolver of $4 million. And what happens once the fuel revolver reaches the $4 million, all of the excess above $4 million is automatically put into their operating fund. So we have a cap of $4 million. Currently, at the beginning of July 1st of 2017, there was a balance of $1.77 million in there. They're projecting a surplus at the end of June 30th, 2017 of $575,000. They are going to ask for a transfer out of it at a town meeting of 120, is that correct?
We, at least 120 we know already for an emergency repair, but there may be more. We're working the numbers right now.
So,
And when would you know that? Which is when? I'm sorry, I don't know the dates.
Second Tuesday in February, I think it's.
Okay.
10th or 11th.
Okay.
I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Tom, but we will be going to town meeting with a request to authorize the cap at $4 million again this year.
Yes, and I think one point that we should make is that our home rule petition was approved, I believe, last year to not have our revolver be part of the overall revolving capacity.
Cap,
if you will.
yeah, capacity. Yep.
So it's been removed from both the 10 and 1% cap restrictions.
So are you guys, and for those that have been on the committee as well, but Henry and Jean, are you following how this is tracking? Yeah. Okay.
Any other questions on the airport, the fuel revolver? Next was the ambulance reserve fund. This fund is set up to pay for costs associated with operating the ambulance service. There are portions, some of the costs are paid for out of the general fund. The revenue here is derived from patient revenue, primarily funded by insurance companies. In 2017, we had projected $366,000, and there was 4 permanent people already in there, and we had projected hiring 2 people starting in January when we were moving forward into the ALS program. As of right now, we're not at that point where we're moving as rapidly as I think all of us would have liked. I will tell you that effective July 1st, 2017, the Board of Selectmen at a meeting in, I think, April or May of 2016, or for fiscal 17, changed all the basic life support rates and increased them. At the time, we didn't have a projection. It looks like we're going to bring in about just over $650,000 in fiscal 17 just in the basic life support changes. Those are accounted for in the projections in 18, 19, 20, and 21. We've also projected the delta in change for any of the previous calls that were reviewed by ComStar that would have been eligible for ALS billing. And if we start ALS during fiscal 18, we project we could bring in another $153,000. The $418,000 in salary includes the 4 original permanent employees that were in the fund already. It includes full year calculation for the 2 part-time, the 2 half-time people that we had in the 17 budget. The expectation is at some point, we still are in, obviously, some of this change requires union negotiations as well, so we're still going through some of that, but the expectation is that at some point during fiscal 18, we'll be moving forward with all of that. We haven't projected any additional increases until we sort through any people or any firefighters that might be interested at the fire station currently in becoming certified as a paramedic. Once I think we get a handle on all of that, then we'll know for future years what we may need for additional staffing to maintain the program that the chief would like to implement.
What's the likelihood of the hiring getting done by, before the end of the fiscal year?
Which fiscal year?
This fiscal year.
Probably not very good, Chief.
Chief?
Or,
We have an interview scheduled for next week. So hopefully we have 1 current open position and 4 other positions that are open. So we're looking to hire 5 people out of the interviews next week.
Are all of those positions coming through the ambulance reserve
No.
fund? Okay, so those include other positions.
Excuse me, I'm sorry.
Those include other positions with your department, but specific to the two people that were anticipated to be hired by the 17th, the $80,000 salary budget that's in here for half a year, they have not yet been hired.
Correct, they have not.
Yeah, but you anticipate having them on staff before the end of this fiscal year?
We do, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And then the other people, will catch you on your budget stuff?
You'll get me, yep.
Okay.
The
Okay.
other large capital expense, the other large expense of the ambulance reserve fund funds is obviously the purchase of ambulances. Last year, we budgeted $270,000 for a new ambulance, and there's an additional $50,000 for the upgrade to ALS capacity for the ambulance. And again, this year, we would, through the capital program committee and their recommendation, there was a $279,000 request for a new ambulance and a subsequent $50,000 allocation as well for the upgrade and fitting of the ambulance itself as well to ALS. Once we get those, we believe we'd be actually be able to move out till approximately 2021 at this point before we were getting another one.
Brian, what did you say was the marginal revenue from the ALS services and the rate change to BLS?
So, fiscal 17, you're gonna see about just under $300,000 change to the increase in BLS rates, okay? We're projecting about $306,000, roughly thereabouts, in 18. It's approximately $153,000, based on the number of calls that we had and based on review of those and what would have been eligible for advanced life support services in the ambulance.
So about $450,000.
About $450,000 change. Now, it should be noted that the board has already approved ALS rates, and at some point we would be going back to them and showing them what this has generated, what we need, and potentially asking for an increase in those rates. They're primarily paid for by the insurance company. The rates that we projected or we approved are kind of on the middle of the road on where people are charging for those at this time. So.
Can you define primarily?
Primarily what?
Does it mean 90%, 95% that the insurance company pays for ambulance rates?
About 90%.
Just a curious question.
How much of the bills get paid by insurance companies? I think the private insurance companies, I think 20% of our calls are private insurance, 20 to 30%. Those insurance companies pay, I think, 90% of the bill. 50% of our calls are Medicaid, Medicare, Medicaid. The government sets that rate, and I think it's very low. It's around $500 or $600 a call, and there is no copay to the patient. And then there's about, I think there's, what does that leave? 20% that's 20% that are uninsured, and not a whole lot of those people end up paying anything.
So it doesn't create an unnecessary expense of collection?
No, it's the same collection fee we pay no matter what we charge for a rate.
Okay, thank you.
Good.
Yeah, I think I asked this last year. Do we trade the ambulances in, or we just sell in the open market?
We can do either one. I think what we have done for vehicles is auction them off afterwards. So this next year coming up, I think if we can, we'd rather trade it in. It's easier for us. It's one step rather than a second step.
Just wondering what we got for them.
We generally don't get much money, $5,000 or $10,000. They're not worth a lot of money when they're used up, unfortunately.
Need a used car?
I'm just wondering if it was in there somewhere, the number.
You see a lot of them as plumbing trucks, building trucks, and you'll see the locksmiths.
We don't actually account for it here, no.
Okay.
We don't use all the funding, then it would just flow back to retained earnings, and since it's a really, valuing the trade is kind of is a guess, and it's just not something that we've done historically.
We're replacing 2 tanker trucks right now, and the old tankers will be sold off, and the money goes to the general fund. Doesn't come back to our department.
OPEB trust fund. So this was the Chapter 32B, the language for an OPEB trust fund, which is used to help fund the rather large amount of unfunded liability for other post-employment benefits that we have. Basically accrues cost of health insurance for retirees after they retire. In 2013, the town started funding it. They funded it with $250,000. We didn't fund anything in 2014. 15, we put $500,000 in, and we've continuously done that. Current balance is projected to be right around $1.8 million, not including any investment income. We're actually meeting with the investment advisor to review the performance in the portfolio relatively soon here. 2018, or at the 2017 annual town meeting, we will again be putting forth an article to appropriate $500,000 to allocate into this. I will note that it was one thing that the rating agencies did note, and it's one of the larger contributions across the Commonwealth on an annualized basis.
So that's the good news.
Bad news is we need to find a way to fund approximately $88 million.
Wow. You said we had a fund. I went to a meeting, I don't know how many, 3 or 4 years ago on this, and the state actually had a fund that, almost like a pension fund that.
They can, yes, there is one. We've had a couple reviews of the money and allocations, and my personal opinion, and of course it's the treasurer who is ultimately responsible, and I have no authority to direct her what to do in any way, shape, or form. I'm not entirely convinced that going into that state fund is actually will produce any better results, because you have no control over how they invest the money in at all. Here, we at least have some control over it. It's still producing roughly the same returns that we could get with an outside investment advisor at this point. They're not doing 3 or 4, 5% better than what we would get right now by going to, like there's a firm, one of the bigger municipal investment firms, Bartholomew, returns as good or better than what that's returning.
Only because I remember the Barnstable Retirement Fund, remember how that was like the worst performer forever?
And they
So,
turned
I
over,
don't know, we never joined the crowd until, I don't know, it was too late, or I don't know.
Well, by the time, they were kicked, the state kicked them out of told Barnstable they had to go to Prim.
we can, there is a special part of PRIM that's set up just for OPEB. And we've looked at it a little bit. We've looked at a couple other approaches to doing this. There are some investment firms that have only OPEB trust fund money. But right now, we're not being substantially outperformed by PRIM, and there's still there's some downside in the fact that you have no control over the investments that they put you in, and you have you have all the risk, but you have no control over where it's going. So, believe it would.
Can I be bold and ask what your latest return was as of 12/31?
You can, and I don't remember it off the top of my head, but I will have it for you at the next
Okay.
meeting.
I'm just going to compare it to mine.
We put both of them on here. I think it was just the capital stabilization on the agenda, Mr. Chairman, but we have them both on here.
Okay.
There's no proposal to add any money to those at this point. The capital stabilization was created at the 2015 town meeting with a appropriation of $1 million from free cash. 2016, we allocated another $250,000 from free cash. We will not be recommending any allocation from free cash at these meetings for either of the stabilization funds.
Okay.
The next fund being the reserve fund, which falls under the auspices and control of the finance committee. Annually since 2015 has been $500,000. And we would again at the end, at this annual town meeting, be recommending another allocation through the raise and appropriate of $500,000.
And as we sit today, where our fiscal year
Whether it be Denny to
fund has not been touched. Okay.
Here was.
And excuse me, and if it isn't touched or any remaining fund balance, it flows to free cash.
Goes back to free cash.
Okay.
So then there was a question, I think on the agenda, there's an agenda item, if I'm not mistaken, of free cash. We've given you a schedule. Free cash was certified effective as of July 1st, 2016, at $6,642,219. Once it's certified, it's available for appropriation at any special or annual town meeting. We've proposed using $1.25 million of that for one-time expense increase request. There is, on page 15 of the packet, there is a list of all the expense increase requests. On the second line, we have total amount of one-time items recommended, which does agree to this line. The capital program committee made recommendations for capital projects, and we proposed financing $3.8 million of those with free cash, which does fall in line with our free cash policy to use it for one-time items or for capital items. It's not to be used to fund annual operating issues. We also have reserved, and I can't go into incredible depth about this, but last year we had a problem at the landfill with what's known as mixed excavation waste, which is basically sellables and other dirt delivered to the solid waste facility. We, at this point, as we run through the numbers, are holding back a $1.5 million of free cash to potentially have to transfer to the solid waste enterprise fund to fund a potential revenue shortfall, because last year the Board of Selectmen, in order to try to close the gap between what the mixed excavation waste cost the town for disposal versus what we were charging, raised the rate from $30 to $60, and the amount of mixed excavation waste being delivered to the facility on Nantucket Road has plummeted from 15,000 through December 31st of 2015 to approximately 1,500 tons through December 30th of 2016. And the reason that we have to do this is because when you set your tax rate, you set a revenue and expenditure side for the enterprise funds. It becomes part of the whole entire process. And if we don't meet the revenue number, we have a revenue deficit which has to be provided for before we can set the next tax rate. So we are taking a precautionary measure that we may have to fill something to fill the hole. So that's why we're doing it now.
So I'm assuming that the decline is not a leading indicator of a fall off in
Building permits.
It's
Building
not a leading
permits.
indicator in a fall off. The building permits, it's a leading indicator that
So where did it go? Did it just fall to the private
Price
guys?
was too high.
cellar holes or pits on the island somewhere that need to be filled to be able to build on.
So we don't think it's going off island with somebody else?
No, we don't.
Going off the bluff in Wisconsin, or maybe to fill
No.
the holes in Glowacki?
That could be. I mean, I'm not entirely sure exactly where it's all being delivered.
I know that we dug a big hole on Old South Road, and, they asked if they could buy our dirt, so, meaning Richmond did.
Yeah.
So Richmond may be buying a lot of dirt.
Right.
Okay.
Questions, engineering services, nothing was requested, but 100,000 was recommended.
Yeah, I mean, we'll certainly go through this in much more depth at the on the 28th. But
Okay.
I'll give you a brief summary of what had happened. The DPW director had wanted a few additional engineering positions, and internally, as we discussed this, we felt that it might be more appropriate to allocate that $100,000 into a professional services one time to try to get a more broad or a larger breadth of services that we could to help manage some of the much larger projects that are coming down in terms of that, rather than having one or two people for whatever that number and being somewhat limited. So it's kind of a, at this point, it's something that we're going to look to see how it works instead of trying to, they wanted construction management. There was a substantial amount of engineering positions, and I think we internally felt that it might be better to go this way immediately to try to get, an engineering firm that has multiple disciplines across it that we can access as we kind of go through, because as everybody knows, we're transitioning to the DPW director, and we have a deputy director starting as well. So we felt that this was probably, given all of that, the more appropriate way to manage this in at least the next fiscal year. So that's why at this point, it is called ongoing, but we have, I think we actually were funding it with the one-time money next year with an eye towards reviewing and seeing how it goes. And we'll be prepared, obviously, to talk more about it as we go through that budget too, because it would be part of that as well.
Okay, so we should hold other questions till.
Yeah, unless something pops out that, I mean, this is sort of, on the expense side, these increases are the kinds of things that we would anticipate looking at on the 28th.
Right, okay. Well, sorry, yeah. I didn't have much else anyway.
Peter?
Actually, sorry, but just based on the fallout or the lack of refuse, has any decision been made to augment or change the rate per tonnage going forward, or is that just gonna?
Because that is part of ongoing negotiations, I really can't
Okay,
get
that's fine.
into it, to be honest with you.
Sorry. Appreciate the honesty.
Right. Any questions on free cash?
Okay, one more.
Sure, go for it.
Additional funds for e-permitting hosting. Do we have an e-permitting system?
We do. It's called Energov. It's part of Tyler Technologies bought Energov, so it's part of our Munis package. And
So this isn't plus permitting, because there was talk years ago about having.
it's actually, it's going to be rolled out for multiple permitting disciplines,
Oh,
obviously.
so it's still in the works.
It is. We moved away from Acela because it couldn't be configured or rolled out the way, I don't know all the details about that. I wasn't here when it all started, but we allocated money in this year's town meeting, I think it was, to get our own e-permitting software. And that process is ongoing right now, but that's what it's for. Not only just those, but all kinds of other permits that are issued by the town.
We do moorings online, right? Is that part of?
It will be part of this, yes. And there'll be a lot of permits eventually that we'll be able to roll out. I think the goal is to get the plus permits done online sooner rather than later.
Great.
So the applicant would be responsible.
So the applicant will be able to do it online, but one of the benefits of this is, from what I have seen, is that there would be iPads that would automatically connect when they're out there to be able to do a lot of the other work and be able to not have to run back to the office and do it and everything, and be able to pull up, when you're at the site, be able to pull up all the application would be available to you through the software.
Yep.
So.
Smart.
Good deal. Okay. Any questions on warrant articles? Now, we will, after the public hearing, we can, excuse me, take votes. And what I'm hoping is that we can move through that in a reasonably perfunctory fashion. After the public hearing, now is the time to sort of make sure you understand what is before us. These are pretty straightforward, without controversy, but that's generally the idea of trying to schedule this stuff ahead of the public hearing. So, I know you want to go, or do you want to stay?
No, I do have to, unless you need me for something.
Well, I don't think so.
Oh, I was going to be when I was in the Affordable Housing Trust.
Yeah.
I will send it to you tonight when I get back to the
All right.
office.
So if the committee will indulge me, I'd like to have, since I think only Tucker is here to talk about Affordable Housing Trust Fund.
Linda Williams was going to come as the vice chair, but had anticipated it maybe no ways on.
Oh, is she gonna come?
She was planning to come and was just respected it.
Oh, okay, all right.
Okay, yeah.
Mr. Chairman, I'll send the balance to Peter for the affordable housing.
Yeah,
What
that'd
they
be
have
great.
right now.
Yeah.
When I get back, because he's
Okay.
connected here, so you'll have it.
Okay, great. Brian, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. As always.
So, our next agenda item is motions for citizen warrant articles. I think that Ms. Stover's articles, we've already discussed, we've taken a vote, and I don't think we had any others that we were scheduled to deal with that we hadn't already dealt with. As a follow-up to some of our questions, I sent I just got back on island last night, Stephen, so I didn't get a chance to do anything with town council. I had a bunch of things this morning, but I did send an email to Ken Bogran saying that we were looking at whether we, as a finance committee, could recommend, I put it in quotes, a line item veto. I did not know what else to call it, of the Academy Hill because of the lessor's obligations to do capital improvements there. So that's still outstanding. I did talk to Linda Holland today. She had been getting the emails, she just didn't assume that we wanted to hear from her. So somewhere along the line, there was a miscommunication, which I will take the responsibility for, but I have scheduled her for the 13th of February. That was the earliest that she and we could do it, given her travel schedule. So,
Did we move that meeting to the 14th, or do we also have a meeting on the 14th?
we don't have a meeting on the 14th, and I moved it off of the 14th because it's Valentine's Day. So for those of you who are romantic,
Okay, I
We're
didn't
taking-
remember that, and we have at the CPC, we have a meeting scheduled, or we had planned to present our whatever to this group on the 14th, so I don't know if there was a previous version of this.
on the,
I'll just tell the CPC, not CPC, sorry, Contract Review Committee
Committee.
Chair, that we're at the 13th and the 14th, it's no problem. I understand.
okay. So Linda is looking forward to coming and having a discussion with us. So she is very welcoming of that opportunity. So the next item on our agenda, is there anything else on the citizens warrants articles? I mean, I think we're basically done with those. We have a couple of comments that we need to have drafted, but I think we've moved through that. And we now wait for feedback and output from the real estate committee and the planning board for some of the zoning changes.
Steve's on that negotiations for the Academy Hill. It seems like the information, at least when I was asking Libby, it seems like it's a can of worms where we have this organization that runs Academy Hill, but they don't have any money, and I think I asked her who oversees the property to make sure that up to speed, it's not going into disrepair. She didn't seem to think there was any. So,
So evidence would suggest that nobody's been at the helm, but in fact, Hal Keane has been the manager for the lessee. The stakeholders in the entity that is the lessee have passed away, and the property manager, Hal Keane, now wants to. And Tucker, you're here, so if I'm saying anything that's incorrect, please chime in.
The primary stakeholder.
The primary stakeholder in the original entity that signed the first lease agreement with the town passed away. So you could say it was a bit rudderless, but Hal Keane is not brand new to the property. They're just interested in taking a larger role. Unfortunately, they're not or unfortunately, from my perspective, or in my opinion, none of the debt is going to go away if Hal Keane steps into this larger role. So that's the problem, I think, with the current setup, is that there's so much accrued debt that all, in fact, more than 100% of the projected revenues from the property go to servicing old debt. So there's no ability for the lessee to save money, if you will, to build up reserves for these types of maintenance and improvement projects. And frankly, with 12 of the 27 units held as affordable, big A affordable units, there's not much room to improve that side of the equation. There's not much room for the operator to generate more revenue. And as we all, I think, are aware, old buildings cost a lot of money, especially when maintenance hasn't been kept up through the years. So I don't see there being good prospects for the situation getting better for either the operator or for the town.
I mean, I know we want a line item that, the windows, but it just seems like, I didn't know where it was all headed, where in the end, we're gonna have to fix the windows anyhow as a town, so, CPC money's matched to a certain amount, so it's a good funding source, other than just 100% out of the general fund,
Well,
3 years from now.
a good funding source would be the operator that gets the other financial benefits of running the town. And if this operator's not able to do it, a new operator may be able to, because they wouldn't be burdened with all the same debt that this operator and its predecessors have accrued.
It fundamentally cries out for restructuring of the debt on this deal. So that CPC, we'll have an opinion on that. We did make a motion, and we approved to adopt the CPC appropriations to be reduced by the Academy Hill School windows. So I think that's the end of our discussion on warrant articles. As you, looking back through our meetings and notes, we've basically most meetings have had a start of a discussion and an ongoing discussion about the issue of understanding what the build-out potential for the island is, the population here on the island, and it speaks to the fact that we as a committee are just, are seeing very, very significant amounts of capital requests for infrastructure. We've spent a lot of money over the past couple of years with a new school. We're just, we're bearing the burden of some very, very significant growth. And this subject seems to be very elusive in terms of trying to wrap your arms around it and get some good discussion going in the community. And so this is something that Stephen and Henry, I think, first surfaced certainly a few months ago. And I know that they've had some conversations with people around the community. Since they surfaced it, I have participated, not directly with them, but with others talking about this. And there is definitely an interest in seeing if this type of process can move forward. So what we're looking at and what Stephen drafted up was basically the core of a letter that would come from the Finance Committee to the Board of Selectmen, asking the Board of Selectmen to direct our planning department to either conduct themselves or hire and have conducted a build-out analysis for the island, and it may not be the planning board planning department that tackles this, but that we have an approach to trying to determine what the population is currently on the island, so that we can begin to engage in a discussion about what we're going to do to ensure that we have a sustainable island to live in 20 years from now. Oftentimes one gets these feelings in the moment of the immediacy, and it's hard to look beyond that, but we've been in a very sustained period of building, and I know for many people, it just feels like the wheel is going faster and faster. So I thank Stephen and Henry for pushing forward on this, and I'd like to hear what people think about it. Ultimately, I'm going to ask for a vote to endorse this or not endorse it, whatever the committee feels. But with that, I would appreciate in hearing what committee members have to say about this and what we're trying to do. Stephen, do you want to kick it off to supplement what I've said or contradict what I said because I got it wrong?
Nothing to contradict, and I'll just underscore the fact that we've talked about it a number of times, and I've heard this issue talked about in a number of ways by a number of different groups, but we haven't, as a town, endeavored to get the data that I think this body needs and the town needs to do the proper planning, from a planning department standpoint or from a finance department standpoint for what the likely prospects are in terms of the number of people, in terms of where density is now allowable, where it wasn't before, and any number of unintended consequences that have to do with all of those things. So I'm hopeful that this discussion leads in the direction of approving either my proposed letter or some modified version of it, so that the Board of Selectmen hears from us that some action needs to be taken, and hopefully this moves forward in the direction of getting both an accurate population study, which I've mentioned in the past. I believe there's private funding for, if the town makes the request to take on this challenge of putting a number on how many people are here today. There is private funding that's available to support the town in that effort. And then second to that, getting a build-out analysis of what the potential is for more people to come here under zoning and health and other applicable codes and regulations. So I hope we can move there. It's not going to be a fast process even if we start today, but we can get there if we get started. So
I guess I'll just add to that. One thing I would also say, so we've talked to Worcester Polytechnic Institute, and they have also said that if the town endorses this type of study, that they will basically put us at the top of their list for projects. So just to, I guess, say it again, the ball's in our court. Whether we choose to do anything with it, there's a lot of people out there who want to see this done and who are willing to provide the funds and even some free manpower. But just to hopefully guide the discussion a little bit, I want to get away from what's the year-round population, because we are not a year-round population. We have all different types of groups coming here, all different types of years, and what we've been doing in looking at our population is assuming that it is a static year-round thing. If you looked at the Worcester Polytechnic trash study, you'd see that it fluctuates wildly. And just because someone is only here 8 months a year doesn't mean they shouldn't be counted. They're still flushing a toilet, they're still calling 911, they're still getting arrested or needing a lifeguard or whatever. So just going forward, I want everyone to be thinking about that in this study, that it's really subsets of populations who visit the island versus who is here all the time, because who is here all the time doesn't represent how much our roads get used, in a very metaphorical way. So that's what I can add.
Peter?
Gentlemen, just a question. You know, you refer to it as a study, which, you know, I can accept. At the end of the day, when the study is completed, will the number that is derived at, that equates to a census, will it be recognized by any state or federal entity?
My guess is no, but I'm not as concerned about that as others might be. I think from as a community, as a town, as a finance committee, it's important to know what the numbers are, whether or not they're recognized by anybody else.
And the only reason why I mention that is there's a myriad of different permits that we as a municipality have to procure, all based on a census figure. For example, the water withdrawal with the state and the DEP. And if we can get an accurate number that they're going to recognize, I think that we should have them, in a sense, define that definition so we can walk into that permit, because obviously water all of us need.
I think that's a great idea, but I think we'd be asking half a dozen, maybe a dozen different organizations what they would want to see. And I think we'd spend more time finding out, you know, getting some consensus from people.
I don't disagree, but I think that all of us use water, and if someone told me, and I think Bob Gardner may be the first one to speak to, or maybe is the person who's going to eventually replace him, where do we stand? Because you don't have to worry about population if DEP says you're using half your water, and they turn us off, because they do direct how much water we can pull out of the ground. And if it's all, and that's all based on a census figure, if we're going through this, I look at that as meat for your argument to get some groups to provide more funding if we had to go from hypothetically spending 100 units to 200, and that 200 unit backs us into maybe fulfilling some of those, what I call very important permits that we have to fulfill.
Sure. Well, I hope the Board of Selectmen, if we write this letter, and if the Board of Selectmen receives it and thinks it's a good idea, those would be good considerations for them.
So I support this wholeheartedly as a business op in town and watching the fluctuations up and down.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Ms. Dover? Would you please come? I hate to ask you to do this, but we got a draconian email today saying that we weren't speaking directly into the microphone, so.
We're all soft-spoken.
Soft talkers. Yeah, I've been ringing this bell since 1999. I think that we cannot plan for, nor can we provide services for people that we don't know are here. I think it's very important for planning and for allocating our resources to know. We've got to know how many people are here. I think in the first decennial census I was involved in, which was 2000, they gave us a number like 10,251 people. And Peter Morrison helped me with that, to challenge that. Oh, no, it was 2010, I'm sorry. He helped me challenge that number, and the federal government said, well, yeah, I guess you have probably more than 10,000 people here, because we had 8,000 voters. And for every voter you have at least one other person who's not a voter. So that put us at, well, right now we have almost 9,100, so that puts us over 18,000 people. The federal government, when they do a census, doesn't even start with the people that we know are here. I have a list of almost over 13,000 people that I can put a name on, and they don't even start with that. So there's a lot of people on this island that don't want to be found, and when the federal census knocks at the door, they don't answer it, and they don't get back to them, and it doesn't matter how many times they go back to the house, they have nothing to do with them. I think there are a lot of avenues that Peter and I have talked about. I talked to the Worcester Tech kids maybe 4 years ago, but without, the town saying they wanted it, wasn't enough for the town clerk to say she wanted it. It had to be the town. And I'm really, really, really happy that you're doing this. I really am. I think it's going to pay off in the long run, and people will, in 10 years, they're going to say, wow, I'm glad we did that. So, thank you.
We appreciate your support.
What's the funding that you get versus 10,000 people versus 20,000 people?
Well, I think it was in 2000 they said that we gained $1,530 for every person counted. 50 cents for the public library per person. So when you think about, 50 cents times 10,000 people versus 20,000 people for the public library alone, that's a lot of money. And if, your highways, the highway money, education money, disaster relief is pegged on the federal figure. So, I mean, if we had a tidal wave hit, we're not going to get relief for more than 10,000 people. I mean, come on, we know we have more than that. So we really need to do this. And I'm really, really, really glad you're doing this. Really.
But let's also understand that we're not going to usurp the federal figures on this. I mean,
No, but you
know,
can challenge them. And when you have, if you talk to Peter about it, the demographics, if you do it in the correct way, they will accept the challenge.
Yeah.
And they did change the figure in 2010.
Gene, any?
I thoroughly support this. It seems like a really sensible thing to do. Is there any way we can attach some sort of timeline and state our need, our urgency for this to be adopted by the Board of Selectmen?
I would be in favor of adding to the letter, a request that these studies be complete in time for, next annual town meeting. I don't know if that's feasible based on, the timeline to procure the studies or, the time that the people would need to actually complete the work, but it gives a date.
Exactly. Thank you.
I don't think, talking with Peter and Worcester Polytech, that does not seem unfeasible, since the students would be, he said, completing all of their, call it undergraduate data gathering by December of 2017. So then that would give a professional demographer almost 5 months to use that preliminary data to then complete, assuming that Plus also does a build out at the same time that Worcester Polytech is helping with the population data gathering. They should have everything they need. It could go beyond that, but I don't see any harm in asking for it. So,
Yeah, they're typically here when October.
yes. Yeah, it's a fall semester.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We will include a request, or whatever timeline we agree on, but what's for working purposes, next annual town meeting, 18.
Mhm.
Any other comments that people want to make? Somebody want to make a motion? Which would probably be along the lines of the Finance Committee sends a letter to the Board of Selectmen using the stuff that Stephen has provided to us, with a few other notes that I've taken, and I would endeavor to draft it, and then we'll get it circulated in a way that we don't violate the open meeting law, so that people have a chance to look at it, and then we'll send it along.
Okay, so I'll make the motion.
Pardon me?
Okay. So I'll make the motion for the, for the Finance Committee to approve a letter to send to the Board and Selectmen regarding population and build-out analysis.
Okay, great. Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, great, thank you. We'll do that. I will work on that tomorrow, and work with Brian or Julia to figure out how we can get the stuff out to everybody so that you can comment without us commenting to each other.
Great. Thank you.
So thank you. Finally, on our agenda, the Affordable Housing Trust Fund fiscal year 18 budget. And Ms. Williams, I see you're here as the vice chair. I'm sorry? Yeah, no, I know that Tucker's here, but, what we, as you guys are aware, as the committee is aware, the Affordable Housing Trust Fund request was pulled out of Article 8, which is the general fund budget. It will have its own article to go before town meeting, and I believe it is $500,000. And given that it will have its own standalone article, it's our responsibility to make decide whether we want to support and adopt the article or whatever else, other actions we might want to take. But I think that the committee was interested in hearing from the trust fund, and I think that probably just to sort of get right to the meat of some of the questions that arose, what was provided to us was a one-page, rather skimpy summary of funds, a little bit of a sources and use statement, which I think you all have probably seen. And I think it would be really helpful for us as we go forward and relative to your $500,000 request, exactly, how does your program come together in the balance of 17 into fiscal year 18 and beyond? It looks like there's about $1.25 million of balance with what potentially is coming your way with the CPC grants, the $500,000 from the town, that's another almost $1 million. So you have a fairly significant reserve there, and I think we as sort of with the fiduciary responsibility for the town's finances would be very interested in hearing what the plans are, how the money is going to be spent, and what the likelihood is that you're going to move through in a reasonable period of time, and that this money isn't going to be dead money for the next 18 months just sitting there.
Well, as with most affordable
And then-
housing trust funds
yeah.
in the state.
Would you mind coming up?
Linda Williams.
No, thank you.
As with all other trust funds in the state, they have to stockpile. For us to do anything meaningful, let's say we got involved with a public-private partnership on a development, we were interested in the Coffin property at one point, we didn't have enough capital. They stockpile. They get a lot of money every year. I went through every single affordable housing trust fund in the state. Took hours, but I went through every single one and how they allocate funds. Almost all of them, here's your lump. They don't tell them what to do with it because the trust fund is exempt from being told what to do with it by the FinCom or the selectmen. Except for the selectmen gave us the $1 million last year, and we have to go back to them and tell them what we're doing with it. We have to continue to stockpile in order to do anything meaningful. 300,000's coming out of this minimum to help the town do what they're supposed to be doing on their own with the infrastructure of Tacoma and into the new subdivision. So that's 300,000 coming right out of there. I believe Bobby wanted to take everything this time and put it towards it, and we're not doing that. That's why we had to develop the budget so we can allocate funding to various programs that we're doing. We've already been approached by 2 individuals who are getting covenant homes who need help with the closing costs, ranging from $5,000 to $10,000. So we have, Tucker's in the process of drafting an actual policy that we're available up to $10,000 to get these people 80% and below into covenant homes. We may do a tiered program for the 100% versus the 150%. If you get 150%, that's a $600,000 house. You can pretty much get there yourself. So we're really targeting the 80% and below, 50% to 80% to qualify for these other units. Then we were talking about gap financing, which we haven't really developed a full program yet on the gap financing issue.
Gap financing.
Gap financing is if you don't have enough money for down payment to get into a covenant home, probably usually the 80s to 150s. That's where we're looking at that, to get somebody into a home. Other people can come to us, Habitat can come to us, Housing Authority can come to us, Sachem's has come to us, or will be coming to us for whatever they have overruns over there. And, because they got cut by the CPC by 200,000. So we're just in the process of developing each program as we move along. But without capital, we can't do anything, which is why we're stockpiling, because now we actually have capital, and we haven't had capital in 7 years since I was one of the original members, we
Right.
haven't had any capital, because the selectmen tried to kill us. They wouldn't show up to a meeting for 2 years. There were the at-large members, we were outnumbered. I represent the Housing Authority. We were outnumbered, and we couldn't get a meeting together to deal with 7 Surfside, and we couldn't get a meeting together to, advance the request for funding so we could do things, because we've missed a lot of opportunities on buying covenants on existing units, and we missed a lot of opportunities to help people. And to get involved with Coffin property or Holgate's property or some other property, or the Holgate property, public-private partnerships. So 1.2 may look like a lot. It really isn't compared to a lot of the other affordable housing trust funds in the state, which suck up a lot of CPC funding.
I think personally, it only looks like a lot because the 1.268 is exactly what you have in the account right now.
Right. But we're going to be starting to spend that because we've got the
Right,
policy.
but
Down there, you
like-
got 22 units coming in at stage.
So we have the housing production plan.
Yep.
But where is the affordable housing trust funds production plan? Like what is going to be the deliverable from I'll use this one. What is going to be the deliverable for that? How many units are we getting for 300,000 creation of shy units? Or 350,000 pocket homes and partnerships? What are we getting for that?
We don't know yet,
Well, then how do we know that that's where the money's going?
because that's what we have voted on to allocate the funding to.
Okay,
We
so
just haven't put the
somebody came up
programs
with the
out.
number, 350,000
Yeah.
for pocket homes and partnerships, and you all said, that's a great idea, how many are we gonna get for it? And then you determined
depends on
that
how
that was
many
an appropriate amount of money.
What are they going to ask us for? It's all dependent on what the programs are that we get involved with, and that's going to be a varying number. We do know that the down payment assistance is capped at 10,000.
So,
And then
so what,
when they sell the property, the 10,000 comes back so we can keep using that.
right,
It's not a grant program, so.
No, I fought for the grant. The rest of the board voted to make it a loan,
Yeah.
which goes on their deed, and they give it back to us. Unless there's extenuating circumstances, we have built in a waiver protection.
okay.
Maybe I can
Go ahead.
shed a little more light. First of all, thank you for the opportunity to be here and have a discussion, and I want to thank this board for the recommendation of $1 million last year. So with respect to the extent it's useful to you all to talk a little more specifically about the uses line item. So the creation of shy unit line item is intended to be for the accessing infrastructure at what we would call 6 Fairgrounds Road, which is the project the Board of Selectmen is considering issuing an RFP for the development of 64 rental units, all of which would count towards the shy list. The Board of Selectmen is undergoing a discussion amongst itself, particularly next Wednesday, about the level of affordability restriction they want to put on those 64 units. So it would start at a minimum of 25% of the units being affordably restricted and the 75% being at market. That's sort of the minimum threshold. It could go up to 100% of the whole project being affordably restricted at different levels. It could start as low as 30% AMI for probably a handful of units, 60% AMI, which would allow the project developer to tap into the low-income housing tax credits, which are a major source of subsidy that a lot of programs in other towns around the state utilize, and then be restricting as well at levels that we might consider to be Nantucket affordable, not big A affordable, so 100%, 120, 150, et cetera. So the board itself is trying to find its consensus on the level that would be created at that particular site. So the 300 is, again, intended to be for the accessing infrastructure, the roadway work to get in to access that site. Then
Sewer. Anything
sewer,
paid for.
water, roadway, it's roughly 300 feet to service accessing the site.
Plus, Tucker, you're well aware, there's 350,000 coming out of here which wasn't really known at the time we did this. There's 350,000 from the selectmen allowed us to use 350,000 of
For
the
the
million.
yacht clubhouse.
For the yacht club.
So that's
So
not,
that's the
not pocket,
home and
that
it
is.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's where that's
350,
coming
that's
out
for
of.
the creation
So that's
of
for 2 units.
Yes, correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it probably won't be that much, but we wanted to make sure that we had a known figure.
Right.
Because the water
I hope
company's
it's not that
donating the
much.
water pipes.
We certainly hope not. We don't know the numbers yet. We have to go through a process. We've engaged an architect, actually, who will be working on both sides of the project involving this particular house. And he's putting together what's necessary to go out and get bids and really nail down what the number is. But that's what has been earmarked toward that project, what the board approved, I believe at the meeting on the December 21st.
Yeah, for this year, because we're halfway through the year, so this is sort of fluid, because we don't know what the
Well,
cost is
it's
from
not so
Kara yet.
fluid, because the money that you came into the year with is what you have.
Yeah.
And that's part of my issue. I won't say our issue. My issue is that when we go back, Tucker, when, if I'm part of the team that goes up again to the State House and says, we need whatever they call the housing bill, they're going to say, what are you doing for yourself? And we last year said, well, we as a town allocated $1 million to this effort.
Yeah.
So we need some deliverables to say, the same way you're right now being asked to say, or to justify more money,
Yep.
we as a town and a community are going to be asked to do the same thing.
Yep.
And I think I don't envy your position right now because there's not a lot to defend, I don't think, in
But the
terms of
state
what
is
the
also
deliverables
fully
are.
aware that you have to stockpile
I
funding.
disagree with that statement.
Yeah, it's a
Okay,
fund.
well then let's talk about what they are. I want to be convinced that a lot's happening.
We are about to issue, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, it sounds to me like there's $650,000 leaving the
Tied
door.
up.
Right.
So I'm not sure if they're not doing anything. I think
Right,
there's-
but with respect, 350,000 you think is more than you need, but it's only also for 2 units. If we were going to spend $175,000 a unit, I would say, as a town, that's not a good use of money.
You're not going to get it any cheaper.
For a gifted house to be put down, I would
Yeah,
say,
we got
yeah.
foundation, we have utilities, we've got to fix the wall because they're splitting up. They're not common wall anymore.
Right,
You have to meet current code. The minute you move a house and you touch it, it's got to meet current code.
yep,
One of them's going to have a full foundation, one's going to have a crawl space. One's going to be 80%, the other one's going to be up to 150 for another town, for a town employee. So long as we get the 80% one, they both go on the shy list. That's the current discussion with the selectmen. They wanted them both for town employees. You've got federal and state restrictions on the 80% unit in order to get it on the shy list and have them both count. So because we didn't have any funding at all, really, until July 1, we are now able to develop programs we couldn't do anytime when we had no money. And again, all affordable housing trust funds in the state stockpile funding over a several-year period in order to get enough capital to actually do something or enter into public-private partnership like we would have had with Holgate's, which we still may.
On average, do you know what the balance is in most trust funds?
Oh, some are far in excess of this, but some have been in
10
existence,
million,
some have
5
had funding all along, that's the problem.
So what's the
We haven't had any funding for a long time.
We hear you. Is there a number there?
No, there's 70, 80, how many did I look at, 100?
I don't know. what the
Something
number
like that.
is.
I looked at all of them, and they range. Some are new,
So
some are just getting funding, some didn't have CPC funding before, so now they're going after the CPC funding. Some of them are dedicating a majority of the CPC funding to their affordable housing trust funds. So it's a massive range. If you just look at the site, you can look at all the ones on the Cape. Most of the towns on the Cape have.
So where do we fall in that range?
We're low. It's because of the cost of building here, the cost of property here, the lack of affordable land because we've got 75% tied up in restricted, conservation land. Very few towns have the crunch that we have and the economic issues that we have. So to do what we need to do, what a lot of other towns are doing, like Ware, Massachusetts, or some of these small towns, we don't have enough capital. So now that we're starting to get an infusion of capital, we do have a lot more flexibility of what programs we want to enter into and what properties we're looking at. And people come to us with properties to try to work with us. We just didn't have any capital before now.
So if I may, maybe to help get Steve's answer, after the 300 and the 350, most of that gets expended, what's the likelihood of those other programs?
Yeah, so I think what I hear embedded in Stephen's question is, well, why haven't you spent the money? Like, what are you doing with it? And I think that you also have to recognize that when the Board of Selectmen approved the $1 million last year, they made clear at the time that their priority for it was the $1 million was to be available for the Six Fairgrounds Road project. And so we're talking here about, all right, we're starting to get going. We want to expend some of the money to be able to access the site. We're holding monies in reserve on the anticipation, I guess you'd say, that a developer might be seeking some additional funding for the interior development of the infrastructure once they have proposed a particular plan for that project. And we won't know the answer of what they're seeking until we've issued the RFP
To
and
get a
receive
developer.
responses
Right.
back.
They may come in and ask us for 10,000 a unit of the 80% and below to make it feasible for them to do that, which is something we've talked about, getting involved with. So until we have enough capital, until we're presented with a project, or we find a project, it's kind of difficult to give you anything more than that, because we're fledgling, even though we've been in existence for 7 or 8 years. We haven't had the ability to do
Should I talk
anything.
about the other line items here? Without the elephant?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think that where we're all trying to get at is understanding what the contours and the framework of the program looks
Yeah.
like. And-
Right, I mean, all of
and-
this sounds like a plan. This doesn't look like one.
And somebody said at our meeting on Tuesday that it sounded like a lot of stuff was being thrown against the wall to see what sticks. And that's it's a little bit loosey-goosey, I
Yeah.
think, for the Finance Committee to, on that basis, say, here, have some more money and see what else sticks.
Yeah, and again,
So where I think what we're talking about is what does your framework of your program look like? Where are you headed with it?
Yep.
And what you've just been talking about, put some,
color.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, again, I appreciate the opportunity to be able to do this. So to just continue down the list, and again, maybe the additional color is helpful. So, we're with each of these programs, it's not sort of a snap our fingers and we can implement it tomorrow morning. Each one, to different degrees, has various levels of complexity. But we are very much engaged, as Linda had mentioned, on the items that under the down payment assistance / closing cost assistance program. So we're working with John Giorgio, having come up with a framework of what we would like to see. As Linda said,
Process.
the majority of the board really would like to see it as a loan program so that it can then be redeployed to future folks who qualify. And as I said, we're working with John now to develop the legal framework and documentation of being able to offer that. And it's timely with both Beach Plum units coming online and the Sachem second round coming online. And, depending on the level of interest from the various applicants and who might ultimately, qualify, but we know two offhand, the two have initially approached us.
And Tucker's working with Beth Ann at Cape Cod 5 to see what the need is and what she's seeing as to how much money they're in gap and trying to get into these units. Even the 80% are tough for a lot of people.
And the legal considerations around where does this stand in the financing stack and making sure it's not problematic and those sorts of things. So so that $200,000 figure, if everybody who was a Beach Plum upcoming recipient and Sachem's upcoming recipient, that funding would get completely utilized. in this year. So the rental buy-down covenant program is something that we had, I guess you could say we have kicked around with the notion that now that we have a housing production plan that's been certified by the state, that there may be opportunity to approach
Existing units.
and have the owner agree to a buy down that would make them affordable, that would make them eligible to be counted on the shy list. That is probably not on our front burner, on our back burner, for a few different reasons. We have a number of shy list eligible units coming online now or are available now that we're working with DHCD to see if we can get those approved, and then how close we are to the gap in order to get a year of safe harbor from unfriendly 40Bs. Again, now that we have the certified housing production plan. And partially the reason in my own thinking on the, call it the back burner portion of that 200 is me having been on the front line with the board last year and hearing very loud and clear, our number one priority for this $1 million is this project over here. You know, you take the 300, the 200, and the 500 we have allocated for next year. We've reserved the $1 million that the board originally had spoke to us about. So, that's where the thinking is and where we're headed with it. This was put together at the time when the board had been considering another $1 million level of funding. Then following, I think, town administration's review of all the different priorities of the town, and we're very respectful that there are many competing priorities. We became aware of the $500,000 recommendation from the board, and so we respect that, and we obviously would need to adjust accordingly.
One of the reasons the CPC went ahead and started giving them money again, because they wouldn't for years. We applied and they wouldn't, is because the town had in last year's budget, or this budget we're in, allocated for a housing specialist in the planning board office, as well as the fact that the town had made a commitment last year with $1 million, and they knew that we were asking again this year. If CPC feels that the town is not doing its part, the CPC may not entertain favorably next fall for more funding. We had a long discussion at CPC, I'm the vice chair of the CPC, about the funding for the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, since Ken and I and Barry are the only ones that have been around since the beginning when we first gave them the 500 and then paid for staff, and then said forget it, because the town was not investing its own funds in a critical need. And it was identified as a priority by the selectmen, and it's a critical need. And so long as we all work together, the CPC will keep on funding. And I may be able to get more funding next year. We just had $7.2 million requests, and 2.8 I think we ended up with. So we had to cut it, but there was a lot of sentiment to go ahead and give them the full $750 that we asked for. So there's a lot of moving parts. And we're now just gearing up to get moving forward because we have money to go forward with, and now we can throw money into certain programs and develop those programs. But also, not just the one program has to go up to town council. Every single move we make has to go up to town council to make sure we're within our statute, because it's state enabling statute. And so we feel pretty positive that we're going forward. We paid for the production plan. Selectmen didn't. We paid for it. Otherwise, it wouldn't have gotten done. And we're the ones that helped draft it, and we're the ones that met with Judy over and over and over again, and we're the ones who got the final draft before it went out to everybody else. So we are doing what we need to do in order to kick this can down the road.
I'd just like to say, the Board of Selectmen was involved with that, and they did several rounds of reviews, and they're the ones who ultimately are responsible for it and endorsed it, and we got it certified quickly after.
So going back to stockpiling, what's the number you need to stockpile to?
There's no finite number. We just stockpile and just keep going with programs every single year. We're not saying we need to get to 5 million because we don't know what the project is.
Right, but you do see how that's kind of a chicken before the egg. You're saying you can't spend money until you stockpile enough, but then I ask you how much you need, and you say, well, we don't know. So
Because we don't know what the programs are, what properties are coming up, who's coming to us, because I believe Richmond is gonna probably come to us. I know they came to CPC and we
But I
was
think
too
that's-
early.
This is what comes back, so Henry's question, floating around comes back to, you guys having a good sense of what your priorities are, and
Yeah.
my
At the
unasked
moment.
question, while you were talking, was, what are the most leveraged activities that you guys are doing? I mean, clearly you ought to be developing some sense of where you get the most leverage for the money that you've got to spend to help accomplish the goals that you have. And so from my perspective, it would seem that, the answer to the kind of question Henry might have, or Henry has, is what's your priority stack look like? How are you gonna work through your money on that, rather than, sort of whatever comes in the door and, tomorrow.
Depending on what the affordability restrictions are that the Board of Selectmen ultimately determines on the 64-unit project, to me, it would be difficult to think of something we could do that is going to get a bigger bang for the buck.
Except for Sachems and big projects like that. But
So
just to be
that-
clear, the whole point of affordable housing trust funds all over the state, and they just throw the money, here's the money every single year without requiring what are they gonna do with it, in 99% of them. The whole point of affordable housing trust fund is that we can react tomorrow to an opportunity. That's why, sole reason why affordable housing trust funds were created under the similar legislation to ours, all over the state, is because we don't have to go to town meeting, we don't have to go to the county, we can react to an opportunity to get affordable units, whether it's 2 or 20 or 22 or 14. We can get units quicker and avail ourselves of property, distressed property like Seven Surfside. We bought it for like a steal, it was $300,000.
So
We
you're
can
more
do that
nimble,
kinds of stuff.
but there can still be, callers on what types of projects you're interested in. And
Anything to get a unit.
And what you might, okay, but some units, some of these programs are gonna cost more per unit than others.
And which is
Some
why
of them
we
have
think
more
about it.
opportunity than others.
Right,
And
and we
those
have
are the
to do
types
that.
of things that I think would be helpful for me to understand
Well, I
what
think the
$500,000
community
gets you.
understand.
Right, I mean, this isn't just, I mentioned the State House before, people want to know what the money is going to get you. And, this is one venue where the money has to be justified, and then there's town meeting, and there's other places also. I think that, the programs that you're describing are great, and it would be helpful, I think, for all of us who are concerned about housing issues and the lack of affordable housing, if there was a website, a 10-page document, a 1-page document, something that outlines how much this is and approximately what you can expect to get for the community's money, for the town's money.
That's been on the website is an issue. We have looked at it. The website is something we're gonna start working on.
Well, I mean,
It's on our
setting
agenda
aside the
every week.
website, just, something,
Something to tell you what we're doing and where we're going.
right.
Yeah, and then we've talked about that, and we spent quite a bit of time on it last week. So that's not something we're not unaware of. But also keep in mind that when we give money and the money comes in to the land bank, we don't know what they're gonna do with it. We just know what their environment is.
I don't think it would be
Open
a good
space.
idea for the Affordable Housing Trust Fund to hitch its wagon to the way the land bank went. I don't think maybe people would like that to continue to go in that direction.
I know, because we feel like we've got enough, but when it was going, nobody knew what things are going to be offered to the land bank to purchase, whose life right out of Nantucket Harbor, and they got quite a few.
Right.
What, the property that just came up on Pulpits, nobody knew that was coming to the land bank.
Well,
So there's a
if we're
lot of things-
successful
that's
with the
why
housing bank
funds are
bill, then you
different.
guys will have that same freedom. But
Trust
that's
funds are
not what's
different.
going on today.
No.
And I just, because something was done in the past a certain way, doesn't mean that it's gonna continue to be done in the future on new opportunities. I mean, I personally see, looking back at the way the land bank spent money, and I guess I couldn't be involved because I was 12 years old when you guys are talking about this, not favorably. So when you kind of make that comparison, it doesn't do anything for me.
No, we're simply talking about funds, trust funds. And the land bank is a fund, and we are a fund, which is an entirely different issue than a line item budget. It's an entirely different issue where you have to use your funding by the end of the year or you lose it. Trust funds were set up to carry the balance forward, so you're available tomorrow to act on an opportunity.
Right, and
That's what they're for, and that's what the legislation says.
And that's correct, but you gotta have some idea of what you're gonna do with the money tomorrow.
Right, and that's what we're doing
And
here.
that's what we're asking, and I think that, I mean, you know, this is $500,000 worth of taxpayer money.
Yeah.
CPC money is taxpayer money.
Yeah.
CPC, it sounds like, if I interpreted what you said about that process, that, you know, that they're holding you potentially more accountable than the town is holding you at this point on what's happens with the money.
Not
Maybe,
really.
and maybe not.
No.
But the broad point is, what are you going to do with the money? How, you know, what are your set of priorities so that tomorrow, if David Worth shows up and makes an offer to you, you guys have some ability to say, that's a great offer or that's a terrible offer, and not, okay, well, that's an offer and we have this money, so let's do it. And I think those are the, you know, how do you, you know, setting forth your priorities, understanding where you get the most leverage.
The sole purpose is to create shy units, shy qualified units.
Yeah, but
That's
you can do,
80% or below.
you could do that by spending $1 million on a unit or $100,000 on a unit.
We wouldn't be
Also,
spending
is-
$1 million for one unit.
I understand, but I'm using that as an example.
Is that true, that your sole purpose is to create shy units? Because we're talking about down payment assistance for covenant houses, which,
It's not this.
It's getting people
no.
into shy.
I mean,
units.
that's a goal, I
Yeah,
think.
it is.
Right,
Yeah.
but it's not the goal.
It's a high priority.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
okay.
The
But
creation
I think to
and
David's
preservation.
point, you know, if you back up 6 months, Linda, and I was talking to you about, you know, private developers and a property on Old South Road, and, you know, maybe at some point there would have been a discussion if that deal had gone forward, the private developer looking for help from the Affordable Housing Trust Fund.
Yeah.
If there was a, you know, a rubric out and available that said, hey, developers, funds may be available, if you provide X, you know, we can subsidize Y, that kind of thing, where, you know, now the town knows sort of what the funds might be used for. Developers are aware of the opportunities, and it doesn't rely on, you know, personal relationships with the board members. I don't know, you know, in the same way that you mentioned the tax credits are available, and developers know those, and they take advantage of them, and they, you know, shift their project strategy to take advantage of them.
Each property is different. It could be that our investment, when you were doing the one on Old South Road, when we were having that discussion, our investment may have been $10,000 a unit.
Right.
If Richmond comes
just-
in, our investment may be $7,000.
I don't mean
like
that you
200
need like
units.
strict rules, but guidelines that would help, you know, maybe generate more interest from the public sector in making
Well, just-
use of these
We
funds.
haven't been able to do that up until now. That's the point. Now we have capital.
Well,
We
it's
can
great.
now
So,
do that.
so I guess the point is now is the time to do it.
Yeah, and that's what we're working on.
Stockpiling is past tense.
Well, I don't like the characterization, you know, like we're trying to stockpile money. This shows
Done,
we're
it's
trying
done.
to move it.
Right.
But
Keep
we
it going.
have one particularly large project in the pipe that till we know a little more information about, we don't know exactly how much of what we may have available is going to be required to make that happen. And again, I would reiterate, it's tough for me to think of another project that could come our way that would provide a bigger bang for the buck. So we are remaining a little nimble in you know, saying this is exactly how we're going to spend every dollar, because we
We don't
need
have
to
the
see
figures.
what is going to come back in a proposal from developers.
There's a lot of moving parts
There are
in
a
this
lot of moving
development.
parts.
And we're waiting
Yeah.
for Karen to
But-
even give us the sewer cost, because we have no idea what that
But
is.
what I would say to what you just said is, once we have insight into, you know, rather than $1 million or what have you being required for that project that we're, you know, 500, well, then we say we can have a program, much like you are describing, that is attracting maybe, you know, development of smaller projects. And so, you know, I totally agree with your point there.
Pocket 40Bs, I mean, those are my, we've had that discussion, those are my favorite things. where you-
Mortgages.
Or you have 4 units on one lot type of thing.
Or
As-
what about just giving money to these other organizations? I mean, you have
They have to ask us for it. We're not going out to give it to them. We have to be presented with something like the CPC, where they come to us with a proposal. So, I mean, if Habitat comes in, Habitat gets money from CPC every year, and so does Housing Nantucket. We're available for that also if they run into something, or they can get a unit that didn't come to the CPC for. We have the fluidity to help them get another unit. We've got 70. I just signed the 70th last week. We have 70 covenant units that Housing Nantucket is managing now. So that's a lot of units. That's 70 families that got into a unit, let alone the dozens that they have that they use for their rental stock. So there's quite a lot happening. We're just waiting for people to get their act together to come and ask us for help as well. I fully expect Habitat to be in.
I would think so.
Yeah, I mean, Richmond's already asked me.
And
how
I
this
think
works.
part of the reason as well that the money isn't out the door, if you will, already, is that we're trying to be judicious about what it does end up going for. And again, this large project is, there's just, I mean, it would be, like every board, there is disagreement amongst members about what different priorities are for the trust. But, you know, my own personal opinion is that, you know, that project would be tough to match in terms of dollars per, what you're getting.
The CPC, see, the CPC funds most other towns' affordable housing trust fund. Why haven't they, or why haven't you got together? It's news to me that you could have seen you have the flexibility. The CPC has to do it once a year.
Right.
Why haven't we had that sort of a relationship where we could have captured those houses?
Because the town took no ownership, they got rid of our staff, they took no ownership of getting involved with creating housing either for their own staff
Well,
or
but who is the
giving
housing,
money for this.
affordable housing trust fund? It's run by the town? I mean, I'm confused.
We are created by separate legislation at the state, like the land bank, like the housing authority.
Okay.
Separate legislation, nothing to do with the town. But it is an arm of the town because our funding is coming from here, CPC funding is coming from here. But we have separate legislation that created us.
Right.
They did fund us the first year, and maybe a little bit the second year. And then they funded staff, because we needed staff to do the small cities grants, which allows people to give new septic systems in return for a covenant. There's all kinds of programs we couldn't avail ourselves of. We had no staff.
So
And
I
then
don't
we had
understand, that's
no
what I'm
money.
trying to say. Why isn't, what's this pullback? Because the CPC always seems to be looking for affordable housing, because they have one-third to give away, and they.
Because the town didn't buy into it. And they said unless the town's going to give us a permanent staff person that's, you know, gets benefits, et cetera, that works in the planning department, plus department, the CP says, we're not taking this on by ourselves. And there was a lot of misunderstanding on how the funds are supposed to be spent and what kind of control, and this is very new at that point. But since that time, the last 8 years, we were one of the first ones to get an affordable housing trust fund. We were one of the first ones to get a CPC. It was feeling it out, and is the town going to actually participate in creating affordable housing and putting their money where their mouth is, especially when they develop the priorities at the Board of Selectmen. And then they said, great, the town stepped in for $1 million last year, we're gonna step in. And as I say, they would have given the full $750 if we didn't have so many other requests this year. Next year, there should be less requests because Satcham's is going, and they don't need any more money from us at that point, hopefully.
If they get it from
They're
you.
taking 250, aren't they?
They're getting 300 this year.
But when you say the town hasn't given any money, we're giving this property over here, we gave
Linda
Satcham's past
intimated earlier that they
property,
would be
the town itself,
No,
when
it
it comes to
didn't.
CPC.
All the money came from CPC and the state, and the
Whose land,
state
whose land was
housing
it?
trust.
Whose land was it, though?
Ours, the
Okay.
housing authorities.
Right, so the town's,
No, it was not.
whose land was it?
The housing authority has owned that property since 1985. Fee simple ownership. So it's not the town's property, it's the housing authority has sole jurisdiction over it. We're the ones that entered into the contract with Housing Assistance Corp. on the Cape in order to develop it, because we're certainly not developers. So no.
Are you able to staff yourselves?
I'm sorry?
Can you staff yourselves?
We still have it in the budget.
We do not have a formal staff person right now.
But you're able to staff yourselves? Like, you are not prevented from spending money on staff?
Oh, are we able to staff ourselves?
It was in Libby's budget this year.
Well, with our funds that we had prior to the $1 million, those, and generally, those are anything that we would expend, just as an operating principle to make sure everyone understands. The trust fund cannot expend any money over $100,000. Just like, I just want you to understand the principle. So I think the short answer to your question is yes, in theory, we could fund staff
Which
for
we
under
did.
that level.
We funded staff after the CPC backed out. We funded our own staff for a couple of years, and there was a lot of problems.
So how many people do you employ now?
Nobody right now.
Why not?
Because we were given money as of July 1 for a part-time person. We need a full-time person. So the theory is to hold on to it until January this year, to hire a full-time. Andrew's not sure he can get it again. So that's a conversation Andrew's having with Libby.
Well,
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, just to clarify, Plus is being recommended, actually, town manager is recommending a full-time staff person, as you are well
For
aware,
FY18.
for FY18.
That's the first time.
If I understand.
There is in the budget half year, I think the contract was extended for FY17.
6 months.
Right, for 6 months for the rest.
Okay, but you, regardless of that, you all could still take your own funds and hire someone part-time?
in theory, you could, but there's also always background to this stuff. The Board of Selectmen, I think, had rightly, wrongly, had a very bad taste in their mouth.
For the
Still
previous
does,
person.
with respect to going back a few years when the town had funded the trust, that they felt the money all went to staff salary and there wasn't much to show for it at the end. So we've been respectful of the background and are really working as volunteers to do what we can. And there's the provision for next year.
A full-time, so what we wanted to do is go full-time starting now, so that person would segue right into the following fiscal year, instead of trying to do a part-time person who doesn't get any benefits, and trying to get them to stay or even take a part-time position. So there were a lot of things at play. I wanted to hire somebody now. I think Andrew has been in conversation with Libby about not hiring anybody right now, so I'm not privy to the administrative side of what's going on over there. So we could.
I would see a huge value in it based on what you guys are telling me right now.
So would I.
I mean, even a part-time person that you could have hired in July could have segued into a full-time position, which you could have told them that, which does often happen in many organizations.
Mm-hmm.
And all these things that you're talking about, the volunteer basis, I get it, everyone needs to have a job. But you have the money and the ability to staff yourselves.
And I'm pushing for that, but as I say, I don't know what the conversation
But why
between
do
Andrew
you
and
need,
Libby
I guess
is.
why do you need to push for it if you have the ability to do it yourself?
Because Andrew and Libby are the ones that are in charge of that particular part of it.
So
I could
you-
go out and hire somebody right now,
So,
but if it doesn't go
so
through
then you
Libby,
don't-
forget it.
Have the
so you,
ability to
so you don't,
Monetarily, I believe we still have
but
the money.
statutorily you don't exist outside of Plus?
What do you mean by that?
I mean, don't you exist outside of Plus, like the land bank?
We
You
do
were saying earlier that you don't come under the purview of the finance committee.
theoretically, but we're also doubling up on our staff. Their staff is helping us.
Yeah, I think they're town staff.
Yeah, we're getting staff from Plus right now.
I see. Okay.
So, as I say,
If I may,
I don't know what the conversation between Libby and Andrew is.
as a person who was at that BOS meeting, it was like pulling teeth to get
Yeah.
$65,000 approved for a part-time person. It was like we were spending the entire budget in one fell swoop. It was
Yeah, I guess I'm
ridiculous.
just still confused
Yeah.
as to why you need to ask them for the money.
Just have somebody at the dump for the. take
We have to
leave
ask the
out.
selectmen for $1 out of the
Well,
million.
I don't think that that's true.
Yeah.
I
Yes,
think-
it is.
I think it's expenditures over a certain amount of
No.
money, and it's not 99
Nope,
cents.
it's $1 for the million, we have the right to spend 100,000, up to 100,000 of the money we've gotten in the past, that 200 something that's already there. Any part of the million, I'm going to buy stamps. I need to go to the selectmen.
That's correct.
But
So,
still-
to echo then what both Steve and Henry said, would it make sense to take the 268 and potentially some of that and go, hey, we can take that money and bring some staff, that gives you much more support?
Except
I
that they
think,
have to
if
go
I
through
may
the
say, I
union.
think this group is wanting for the
We want.
expenditures to keep flowing.
Definitely.
Right.
And
We
in a
want
good,
staff,
productive
but
way.
we have the union contract, we have the benefits package, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's why I don't know what the conversation between Andrew and Libby is. I just know there has been an ongoing conversation about hiring somebody now, and it's been put on the back burner. That was not our decision, that was administration's decision, and they're the ones that control the staff. We don't.
I think they're giving some consideration, within all of the considerations they have to think about with the unions and so forth, where this might fit and.
Understood.
And so forth.
So we may see something in our
You're going to see.
operational budgets.
You're going to see something for.
You
FY19.
betcha. If it's not hired this fiscal year, it's gonna be hired in July. Because we've got stuff to do. Small cities grants take a tremendous amount of time. We had 150 people on that list when we had the previous one.
Can I ask a question?
Please.
I mean, so do you feel that this discussion has been useful in shedding light on the types of things that we are planning to be spending funds on, particularly with the request we're here before you about?
I see it a whole new light.
Good.
And that's positive, right, Cliff?
I
You
mean,
know,
what I might,
I'll
what I
hunt
might,
you down.
I would say yes.
Okay.
Okay, what I might, and this would be at the pleasure of the committee, we might make a comment with our motion that may go along the lines of being more transparent to the community
Okay.
with your priorities.
Okay.
So,
We'll probably have a little information piece at town meeting now that we actually have funding.
but in an ongoing, through a website. I mean, I think that
Feel good.
it helps with your PR.
Yeah.
And one of the concerns, and this is one of the concerns I have with a number of groups
Yep.
and departments in the town, is that we appropriate this money and stuff doesn't happen. It's dead money.
Yeah.
It's money we could be using, doing something else, not that, it isn't gonna get spent on that priority, but if you're not gonna spend it in 2017, and you're gonna do it in 18, that's fine. Come back in 18 and do it. We've got a lot of places where money just sits.
No.
But with a fund, it's totally different. Funds keep
And
going.
I get that, Linda, I appreciate the stockpiling, but I think that what's important is, that understanding that it's important to stockpile and be able to move, and here are the kinds of things, this is where we're putting our effort, is very helpful to the public.
Yeah.
To feel that when we vote $500,000 or whatever the number ends up, whatever we do at various town meetings,
Yep.
that people know where it's going.
Well, it's conscious that we have programs here that are both rental and ownership oriented. I mean,
Yeah, and then that's the purview of
Yeah.
you and your,
Yeah.
board and how you make that up. But I think so I don't know that we'll do a comment, but if, I would say that would be, if we did, it would probably be along that line to
Yeah.
just
yeah.
get it out there to people.
Can I just ask an unrelated question from this draft budget? What is the town's, not the town's, what is the trust fund's interest in 47 Fairgrounds? What do you guys own there?
We own that covenant lot.
Do you guys remember 2 Bartlett Road, the Rotary Trust
Yeah,
Fund buying
yeah.
in there and helping the selectmen? We're gonna put some units there, and then we started to go around, and then there became a problem with the person next door to.
Right, she
the-
didn't want to be next to the
Oh my
construction.
God, can you imagine
Yeah,
she was
I
still
get it.
living there?
Well, somebody,
then-
they're using it as a construction office now or something?
Well, the Gail lived next to the new school, the house that was
No,
right next
that's
to
what I
the.
mean.
That's, she was
That
part of
building's
that
being used as a construction office? I think?
construction office and dorm
Still
for those
is.
guys.
Right, okay.
So it was part to Bartlett,
So there's a covenant lot
part
in
part
in
to
front of
part,
47
part,
Fairgrounds?
and we helped her buy 47.
That's the answer?
And we're getting
Okay.
a covenant lot out of it, which we sell, and that money comes back into our coffers.
Yeah, no, that's great. I'm just,
So it was like, it was a shell
No, I-
game. It was moving from here to here to
I
here to
remember,
here.
I remember.
And it was a nightmare.
I thought it was good for everyone.
And it's up at Land Court, which is why it's being
Right.
delayed right now, being able to be farmed out, because we have to wait for Land Court to do it.
Okay,
So that's the story with that. But it'll
thank you
come
very
back.
much.
Yeah.
Thank you all very much.
I'm assuming there are no other questions. If there are, I'm not taking them.
Yeah, and I'm not answering. I plead the fifth.
No, thank you very much for coming. I appreciate it. It's been very helpful.
It's
so
helpful to us.
taking the time to visit with us. Committee, anything else? Time for a drink?
We're being taped.
At least a drink of water.
Our next meeting, by the way, is a week from today.
Thank you.
4 o'clock. Stephen, it is I saw what happened. It was the 14th. We moved it to the 13th.
I see.
And
Okay,
So
well, I
you're
will,
off by one day, but
I will
hopefully
let
you'll
the
be ready.
committee chair know.
Julie? No. Thank you very much for all your help, getting the stuff to us. So we're here next Thursday, I think,
4 o'clock.
4 o'clock. And what's on our schedule for the next go-round, that's on the 19th. The schools are going to be in. Our island home is off. There will be some selectmen-sponsored articles, and we are likely to see a diff article from the selectmen. And I think that, and I may put it on the agenda. I don't think they're going to vote on it until next week, which is Wednesday night. We will see whatever it is, but that would allow us to have a conversation about it. It would come, and that may take some both work and understanding as to what all that.
What is a diff article? Sorry.
District increment financing. So basically, I guess you missed the Brian short version. It's identify a district, in this case, Old South Road, from the airport and potentially all the way down to Marine Home Center. Fix the tax levy that's coming out of it today. Any additional tax revenue that comes from the building of new assets would be earmarked specifically for that. And it clearly has some, it's got some impact on, obviously, because most of the impacts that get funded are infrastructure, roads, stuff like that.
Right, and when I first started looking into it, I thought that, well, okay, that's great for that area, but what about, police, fire, school, all the other things that are going to be impacted? Wouldn't they be impacted negatively if this happens? And that's not the case, because it opens up some new avenues for financing, for debt leveraging, I guess. So it's worth a read. If you can't sleep tonight, look up DIFs.
It is worth a read, but understand, we're moving into area. We are a very, very creditworthy town. We have no trouble borrowing money, and this has been, these types of financing districts have been used in communities that have a much more difficult time with their levy limit and are trying to spur development and things that aren't the kinds of problems we're particularly dealing with. So, it's got more than just a sort of public policy implication. I mean, it does have borrowing implications. It's clearly got, does tax revenue get siphoned off into a specific area and shorted elsewhere? So, I mean, if we want to give it a good consideration, it will probably take a little bit of work on our parts. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved. Second?
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate